All right, so this is my keynote lecture on the Italian Renaissance. So this is all of the highlights of Chapter 17, Section 1. Now, on Blackboard, I've already uploaded, and last week you watched my keynote on Italian Renaissance humanism and the relationship between Italian Renaissance humanism and the artwork of the Renaissance. Now, in this one, I'm going to focus on some economic and social history. All right, one, we can't ignore the location of the Italian peninsula as having an influence on the success of all these Italian city-states in the 15th century, in the 1400s. And so one of the reasons for the increased trade is the fact that the Italian peninsula juts out into the Mediterranean and provides all of these powerful city-states such as Florence, Venice, and Milan, and that's just to name a few, an advantage. All of them had access to shipping. And so it's much like today. When you think about it, look, what are some of the major cities in shipping today? In business and in shipping? Well, Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, California. We have one of the largest ports in the world, actually. And look, we have access, we're right on the Pacific Ocean. So it makes perfect sense that cities that are located with quick access to water dominate in shipping. And so when you're a peninsula and you're surrounded by water, it just stands to reason that all of the cities along the coast are going to dominate. So Florence, Venice, Milan, Genoa, these are just to name a few. They're all on our map in our text. So first we have to note that the Renaissance had its origin with the Italian city-states precisely because of that location and geography. Our next slide here talks about some of the new economies that emerge. Now, I'm going to focus on the city of Florence, okay, in northern Italy. A fine example, okay, the increased economic opportunities in Florence led to new economic classes, especially the developing middle class. For the first time in history, we begin to see an emerging middle class. They're not extremely wealthy, they're not dirt poor, they're the middle class. They're able to afford some nice things. They live rather comfortably. And the Florentines called this emerging middle class, they called them the Popolo Grosso, the Popolo Grosso. So these now, along with the new economic classes, you also had new markets for business. You had cloth and textile were two of the largest. You also had banking. You had credit. Okay, printing was emerging, and you also had rising merchants. Okay, because more trade meant more merchants to bring goods in. We also see something called the rise of guilds. Now, a guild, what is a guild? A guild is an organization of specific work or trades, okay? So a guild is an organization for specific work or some trade, okay? The guilds, what did they do? Well, they protected the interests. They looked after the interests of that specific trade. They also oversaw and determined and enforced prices for that trade. They guaranteed the quality of the work, and they also guaranteed and determined whether a tradesman could gain membership in the guild. So, for instance, take for instance a guild that we have today is the Screen Actors Guild. Perhaps you've heard of the Screen Actors Guild. Now, that's a great example. And it's also local, okay? But what does the Screen Actors Guild do? Well, the Screen Actors Guild guarantees, first of all, the quality of acting. Okay, in order to be a member of the Screen Actors Guild, you have to be a working actor. And that means you have to have a certain degree of talent, right? Nobody's going to want to hire a lousy actor, right? And so you have to be a working actor. They also determine, the Screen Actors Guild also determines the base pay for an actor, okay? And so a guild basically guarantees the workmanship, quality, and what they earn. Our next slide here talks about some of the more powerful guilds back in the 15th century were in Renaissance Italy, were the Blacksmiths Guild, the Carpenters Guild, the Bankers Guild, Merchants Guild, and the Painters Guild. If you take a look at the picture in this slide, that's a picture that I took when I visited Florence about 2 years ago. And this picture shows one of the streets in Florence that was operated by the Jewelers Guild. Okay, so these are the merchants who sell and make jewelry, gold rings, necklaces, bracelets, and earrings, and so forth. Anything that's jewelry, okay, anything made of gold and jewelry and nice stuff like that. This street was controlled by that guild. And so this street is where you go to buy jewelry because this is operated by the Jewelers Guild, okay? Just to give you a little sense of how well Florence was doing back in the 15th century, these are some statistics here. And notice that in Florence in the year 1450, you had 80 banks, you had 146 bakeries, which sounds like a lot, but trust me, Florentines love bread. The people of Florence, to this day, the bread in Florence is phenomenal. It's delicious bread. The Florentines make the best bread I've ever eaten. And you'll eat it with every meal. If you visit Florence and you have a meal in Florence, I guarantee bread will be served with it. And so the Florentines love their bread. They had 100 spice shops. Keep in mind, spices were medicinal as well as for cooking. So it wasn't just food. Spices were used as medicine and for healing. 13,200 bushels of grain were consumed weekly in Florence, okay? And some of that grain was used to make beer, by the way. 60,000 sheep were annually consumed by the people of Florence, okay? 30,000 pigs annually. And just to let you know that when we talk about a pig is one of the animals that in Western Europe, pretty much every part of the pig was eaten. Okay, the stomach area, the flanks were used to make bacon. The fat was used to make what they called cracklings. The pig's feet would be eaten. Pig's ears and even the whole head would be made into like a salami, a sausage. The blood was eaten as kind of a sausage as well. And then the shoulders and the rear ends were used to make hams. So you figure a pig has 4 legs, so that means you get 4 hams, right? 20,000 goats were eaten annually and 4,000 oxen. So that just gives you a breakdown. You can just do the math in your head and figure, all right, that's a lot of people in Florence. Just to touch on this idea of humanism again, remember that my quote from my presentation on humanism, man is the measure of all things. So with this emerging new economy and new social classes, people begin to think in new ways. And one of the ways that they think is that man is the measure of all things. What does that mean? It means that man is the only creature in this earth that can think, that can reflect back on its own existence. Do it right now. If you think about it. I mean, stop right now and just think back to yourself as you were back in, say, 6th grade, okay? If you do that, just stop and think and remember something from your life back in 6th grade. Just go back in your mind to the person you were back in 6th grade and reflect on that. And what you're doing is essentially something unique to humanity, and that is our ability to reflect back on our own existence, okay? To look back on our existence, reflect on it, learn from it. Also, unique to humanity is that man can shape his own destiny. In other words, each of us is ultimately the one who decides the scope and the breadth and the quality of our lives, correct? Ultimately, it comes down to us. Some names that we associate with the development of humanism in the Italian Renaissance would be Petrarch, Dante, Pico della Mirandola, Lorenzo Valla, Baldassare Castiglione, Leonardo da Vinci, and Christine de Pizan, if you remember her from our quote the other day. Okay, so all of this humanism focuses and emphasizes on the individual. And notice how that's going to lead to Renaissance artists painting portraits of individuals. So think, for instance, of like the Mona Lisa. Our next slide here is an interesting question. Might it be that survival of the Black Death inspired the Renaissance? Did survival of the Black Death inspire the Renaissance? Think about this. The Black Death devastated Europe from basically 1347 to 1350, okay? Now, within about 100 years, this humanist Renaissance spirit, this idea of being reborn, mi pare rinascere, it sweeps through the Italian peninsula and then through the rest of Europe. Now think of it that it was like this, okay? Think of it this way. Those who made it through the plague, those who lived through it, those who survived, probably thought themselves lucky. And after living through something so horrible, might it be likely that they created or were given or developed, I don't know, a renewed outlook on life, okay? In other words, after you've lived through something horrible, it changes the way you see life. And I'm willing to bet that what we're looking at with the Renaissance is a renewed outlook on life.